Thank you so much, Mary. I definitely couldn't have survived finishing this dissertation without Mary and all my peers. And so shout out to all the doctoral students you get there. There is an end. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. To start, I just want to invite everyone to take a big deep breath together. Just because I need it, and I feel like we usually need it, you know. But so this is part of my dissertation, and what's up? Okay. Oh, now it is. Yes. So this is what we're gonna go through today. A bit of an introduction to what the program is, the conversation garden, some key ideas from the literature. I'm going to focus on two cases, especially this first one, and then a quick discussion. And if at any point you're tired of hearing me talk and you want to look at some pictures, I have a million figures in my dissertation, and you can access them there. But let's jump right into it, right? So why are we here? What is all the rage about community engagement? According to the Carnegie Foundation and their elective classification for community engagement, it is a collaboration between us, institutions of higher ed, and our larger communities for the beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources in a context of partnership and reciprocity. Beautiful, right? Like, we all want that, right? But there's always a but with academics, obviously. What we say is not always aligned with the public pedagogies that we and our institutions are setting forth in our relationships with our surrounding communities. And that tends to be especially the case when universities are surrounded by lower income, racialized communities. And so the public pedagogies also manifest through exclusionary spatial imaginaries and messages about who belongs where. For instance, here in New Brunswick, we often think of the city as being George Street, College Ave, Easton, and whatever is outside of that, we only hear about it through those public safety warnings, right? Oh, there was a crime. That's like the area is dangerous, right? So, so this is kind of how it manifests here in New Brunswick. So basically, what I'm saying is, let's do this. Let's do community engagement, but let's remain place-based, aware of the place we're in, and power-cognizant. So what does that mean, right? That means being attentive to power in many different dimensions. That is not something I came up with. I learned this through working with a collective of program coordinators. I see a few program coordinators. Shout out to y'all for all the invisible work behind community engagement that you do. But I learned this from this collective of program coordinator, faculty, graduate workers that are doing this kind of power-cognizant work here at the GSE. And we try to be aware of power in different ways, right? By questioning sometimes departmental policies, labor relations, or resource distributions that are not conducive to our work and possibly not conducive to fulfilling this equity-focused mission that our department has, right? So questioning it, engaging with community partners from program design levels, right? So what are we doing? What's important? What are the goals in the community and how we can work from that? Creating pedagogical interactions that are horizontal, multidirectional, and co-led. So we're all learning together, and centering the assets and knowledge of community members and organizations. So what can we learn with folks outside of the campus, right? What do they know that we don't know, right? And learning from the expertise, this is a very important one, learning from the expertise of community-based organizations that are working towards social change, right? We talk about social change, but we have community-based orgs out there doing the work, and how can we learn with and from them. Creating routes for all stakeholders in our programs to take on leadership roles. And modeling to our students ways to position ourselves as learners when we come into community spaces. Right, so if we want to learn from community members, how do we show people that we are there to learn with and from them and not to teach or help or fix a problem? And then also working to identify and address power differentials and their impact on different stakeholders, right? Like, so big power differentials, but also smaller power relationships in our connections with people. So now I want to talk to you about the specific program we're talking about, right? So this is something we've been doing across different programs here at the GSC, but I want to tell you about the conversation garden. Danielle is going to give you a piece of paper. We talk about showing rather than telling in this program, right? So instead of telling you what the conversation garden is, I'm going to show you. We're going to have a quick activity. Folks who are online, you can join the activity by accessing this link or this QR code. And whoever is in person, you have a piece of paper. And we're going to play a game. This game is called Find a Person Who. So we're going to ask questions to find a person who, for instance, likes to teach children. For instance, Shawen, do you like to teach children? Yes. So I can write Shawen's name here. I can also ask her follow-up questions, right? Which I won't right now, but you can. And you have some follow-up questions in the back of the sheet. So we have this goals for us in person. The first person to get at least one name in each box wins. Or you can choose not to try to win and just ask a lot of follow-up questions, you know, and just get to talk to someone. And for those who are online, you can work together. Maybe we can mute the computer so that people can talk among themselves online. And you can fill it up with names in this collaborative document, okay?
One name per box?
One name, well, if you want to win. Oh, we woke him up. All right. Oh, should we unmute? Okay, cool. Did anyone get all the names? Oh, my alarm saying that we are done. I know it's hard to come back to our seats because this is much more fun than listening to me talk. But this is sort of what a conversation cafe looks like. If you see this video here, you see it's a loud, friendly, welcoming space. We're all sitting together. The purpose of conversation clubs is to offer opportunities to practice English conversations for immigrant community members. So those are our participants. And then on our end, at Rutgers end, create opportunities to practice intercultural communication for Rutgers students who are our facilitators. A lot of them are going to be here, for instance, teachers, right? So they need that. And then we also get some folks from pre-medical routes and different undergraduate students that can use that in their personal and professional life in the future. This program was started here because there was a big need for conversation practice. If we look at languages other than English spoken at home, Middlesex is already a hub for immigrants, right? And then New Brunswick even more. There was demand, people needed opportunities to practice. And so this program came up as a response to community voice needs for those opportunities. And it was comprised, besides of the conversation club, which you just sort of experience here a little bit, it has academic courses and professional development to train our facilitators. So the folks who are going to sit at the table and get the activity going. And it was developed and is currently sustained in partnership with community-based organizations. A very important one, this organization I'm calling Labor and Education Community Center. They were there in the inception of this program. When the program was created, they were the first partner. They were a very important partner in the year of the program I'm studying here, because almost all my students got placed in this community-based organization. Also, they are amazing. They educate, they organize and fight for better work conditions and social justice in the workplace. They got plenty of state laws, local laws, and different ways they were able to protect workers' rights, and they serve majorly Latin American immigrant workers. Now, the course we teach is very grounded in this idea of praxes, right? We're doing something, we're going in, we're facilitating the cafe, the conversation clubs, and we are also reflecting. So it's a cyclical movement of practice, theory, reflection. We have two courses, and in this one, we're preparing our facilitators. In this one, we're preparing our team leaders, so the folks who are going to lead the whole session. And in both of them, we're scaffolding this critical praxis where students reflect on what they're taking with them from this experience. And this structure turned out to align very well with the honors capstone requirement here at Rutgers, because they have this experiential route. And so we started getting a lot of honor students. coming into our program, to the point that this whole cohort I'm going to talk to you about was of honor students. It has been a gift to get those students coming in because, of course, they're brilliant, they're high achievers, and also they are very culturally and linguistically diverse group of students. And in this specific cohort that I'm going to be talking about today, the vast majority was of second-generation immigrants, but almost all of them had a recent immigration story in their families, lots of different languages. What's in blue is the majority of answers, right? So a lot of South Asian students, a lot of Hindi, Russian speakers, pre-medical students. And in this courses I'm telling about, right? The CLE, we call it Community Engaged Language Education, or CLE. So I'm going to refer to it as CLE. What we are trying to achieve is developing cultural and linguistic awareness and an attention to power imbalances as we're doing all this other stuff, right? And we do that by engaging with critically oriented literature, inviting students to collect field notes, and promoting sustained interactions with immigrant community members. And as we move through the process, we structure more or less reflection opportunities for students to make connections across all those things. And at the end of each semester, they have a synthesis effort. So this is the courses, right? The CLE courses. My study basically looked at all of this and just added some formal data collection events, which I'm calling individual dialogues, like interviews, and group dialogues, such as similar to, it's what we call focus groups, right? But I'm calling them dialogues because these are people I already have a relationship with, right? I was working with those students for a whole year before we sat down to formally collect data. So what was interested in general in this dissertation was how students made sense of their experiences and learning with and from local immigrant community members and organizations. So going a little bit into some key ideas from the literature, this idea of radical hospitality is borrowed from faith-based context, and it's basically an idea of welcoming strangers in our midst, right? And intentionally doing things to constantly welcome strangers in our midst. If we think about immigration policy, immigration politics, media messages about immigrants, that's the opposite of what we see out there, right? Well, and so one of the things we're trying to do in this program, in the Conversation Garden program, is to engage with immigrants from the stance of radical hospitality and provide a counterpoint in this micro level to what we're seeing on the macro level, which is those, I don't know how to say that word, inscrutable and complex immigration policies, biased media coverage of immigration in the United States. Another important idea is that idea of emergent strategy, which is ways that we practice being in right relationships to our home, to our places, to each other, practice complexity, and grow a compelling future together through small interactions. So, right, again, from micro to macro, right? How we relate differently here and create possibilities for things to happen differently outside of here. And then when I looked into the literature on power-cognizant or critical community-engaged learning, what I encountered is very similar to what I showed you in the beginning that we have been doing in this department for a few years in this loose collective, right, that I was telling you about. So the literature was very much saying, like, yeah, that's what you should do if you want to stay power-cognizant. One of the two things I'm going to highlight here, because they're going to appear in the second case study I'm talking about, is this idea of being aware of power differentials, so, right? So being critical, for instance, of the fact that most Rutgers students don't go outside of campus because they feel it's unsafe, and that student housing has better quality than than the housing outside of campus, for example, right? So being aware of these broader things, and working to redistribute power. So in our second case, we're going to go back to it, right? So, and the student we're talking about, she's called Victoria, and she's basically calling this big power differentials, or also power imbalances that are negative, she's calling them coercive power, versus when we work to redistribute power, she's calling that collaborative power. I'll get back to that. But so basically getting this idea of relationships, hospitality, right? And this idea of being power-cognizant, I found this way to think about community-engaged learning in this conceptual framework to think about community-engaged learning that talks a little bit about like theories, right? Multiple theories, what we do, and our reflection process, right? So this idea of praxis, similar to this idea of critical praxis I was telling you about, but when centering relationships and power, I decided to change this conceptual framework a little bit to say, well, community is actually the ground on which any of this can grow, right? We need to connect with each other. We need to look at each other from our assets, from our strengths, see each other as whole human beings, and then we can do the rest. And then also this special attention to power in when we think about what we do and how we think about what we're doing. Does that make sense? So let's jump into the case studies, right? So within this framework that I briefly showed you, each of the cases I discussed in my dissertation helped me discuss one of those areas. Today, I'm going to focus on Elliot and this idea of community as the ground in which we grow what we're doing. And then Victoria to think about this idea of power-cognizant agency, right? And the critical cases were just cases that allowed us to think about specific aspects of the problem at hand. And they were also aligned with a lot of the things that other students were bringing up. So I'm not going to get into what other students also said, but that is also in the dissertation if you're interested in looking at that. Now, Elliot was a math major who was going into finance. So he joined our program. You saw that a lot of our students were pre-medical, right? So as a pre-medical student, it looks really nice in your CV to say you did volunteer work, right? As someone going into finance, there's no utilitarian purpose to join this program. He joined us because he loves connecting with people. And he brought up in several of his reflection assignments this one exercise that we do every semester in the beginning of the CLE course. So Marina, asked us all to introduce ourselves by stating our names, major, and languages we know. Although this is a simple introductory exercise, this was my second or third time doing it through college. Compared to other courses I have taken, professors never take time to really allow us to get to know one another. And I think doing this activity sets a precedent for what the Conversation Garden is all about, making connections while serving the community. So that was a very remarkable experience for Elliot. And it's something we do really value. So I'm just going to read you an excerpt. The CELE curriculum makes for a tight schedule during our first semester. It includes language facilitation strategies and conceptual lenses, along with an embedded community engaged component. Still, intentionally taking time to learn about students, welcome them and their backgrounds, and invite them to connect with each other is a priority in the beginning of the CLE courses. Different activities invited our funds of knowledge in and facilitated getting to know each other and connecting, strengthening our sense of belonging and comfort. As we learn about asset-based frameworks and approaches to learning, we also demonstrate these perspectives to our classroom social interactions and shared learning journey. That allows us to build a learning community grounded in our identities, histories, and cultural and linguistic assets. So welcoming our students in our shared learning space is key to create a space where the wholeness in us can engage with and learn from the wholeness in others and the wholeness in life, right? So it gets a little spiritual there, but the design, but basically what I'm saying is that the design of this course facilitates communities, starting from our classroom learning community, going into this community placement, so the conversation clubs, and then allowing students to more independently do that and also facilitate communities. So drawing from Elliot's experience and many of his colleagues who emphasize community building and social interaction, I'm saying that social interaction is a method for us because we learn how to better facilitate conversation by observing and working with others. We also humanize and nuance our knowledge about immigrant communities by listening to others' stories, right? I'm not getting into this part in depth, But this exchange of stories, life experiences, again, connecting with the other and learning about them. And we also think of social interactions as an outcome because we facilitate, as I said, this multidirectional relationship where we're learning from each other's assets in our classroom. And then that allows students to recreate that in their community placements when they become team leaders and later on in their professional, personal lives, right? So these forms of social interaction can resonate with students and they can say, well, when I become a doctor, I want to communicate with my patients the way I communicated with people in the conversation club. But what about Elliot, right? Elliot is going to finance. So what does he take with him, right? And again, he went to a non-utilitarian reasoning, right? He said, in the business world, when people network, they're always trying to get something from someone, right? The only thing I gain is just a cool story. I just connecting with others, especially if it's even someone that we really don't have anything in common, it's still cool to just talk to them. So I think that's influenced me. I've learned like, okay, this is something I like, right? So he came in with this non-utilitarian thinking, this orientation to relationships and connection. And what the program did was help him straighten that, right? And practice that. And realizing that connection is a core value of his, right? And he recommended this experience to others, especially if they weren't in public-facing professions. And why? Because he says Americans don't know anything about the rest of the world. Wait, sorry, is this? Yeah, sorry. So he said, yeah, so I feel like sometimes people aren't, especially in America, as educated in certain things as they should be, right? So we don't know, people outside know about America. We don't know about anything outside. So he's saying that a program like this allows people to see, allows people to kind of clear those lenses where they can see other things. So I'm going to move us to our second case now. So it's a bit of a change in topic, though it's very connected. So I'm going to briefly present the case of Victoria, who is a pre-medical student. She's the daughter of a Chilean man and a Peruvian woman who identified as a white-presenting Latina. In what precedes this reflection assignment, she was discussing how her mother experienced racism in medical settings because she is, quote unquote, an indigenous-looking woman. Her father, on the other hand, who is white-presenting like Victoria, did not experience racism, but that didn't mean he didn't experience other forms of coercive power that we had mentioned before, right? So I'm just going to read this in full because I can't not. I talked to my father a lot about all the jobs he took on when he first came to America. Busboy, taxi driver, maintenance worker, you name it. But we believe that one job he took on changed the course of his life completely. Before he could speak English, my father took on whatever jobs he could get. One of these jobs was at a place that made mechanical parts. He had told me that they made him clean these parts using harsh chemicals without any protective equipment. In August of 2022, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. Parkinson's is rarely genetic and mostly caused by environmental factors. The most highly observed environmental factor have been exposure to certain chemicals at the workplace. Once we did our research into the disease, we both knew his independence in his older life is slowly being taken away due to the lack of protection he had as a recently arrived immigrant. I keep putting this in my slides and then I can't read it because so there's not much to say after this, but again, Victoria, when she was doing the sort of critical praxis we're talking about, she was attracted to this idea of coercive power and collaborative power. And she defined coercive power as what allows us to understand the socioeconomic divide between migrants and natives, the exploitation of migrants in the workforce, and the barrier keeping migrants from higher education and more. And collaborative power, created with others rather than being imposed or exercised over others, and serving to empower rather than to marginalize, helps us understand the work of our community partner, LECC. So Victoria had a lot of time working with LECC, and it was a very influential place for her because she was encountering people with similar stories to her parents, right? And she was also seeing how they we're working to change that in that community-based organization. So she wrote, I've met so many wonderful people, but I've also learned that my parents' experiences are not isolated instances by any means. The discrimination and exploitation of migrants is an everyday occurrence and leads to a plethora of health issues that we continue to observe in these populations today. And so I knew for a long time what I wanted to do with my future. I wanted to become a doctor, and not just any doctor, but one that works specifically with underserved communities, such as the one I grew up around. And when she talks specifically about LACC, she calls them a beacon of hope. And, and she says, it gives me hope that there will be less people like my mother who got arrested by her bosses and couldn't say anything about it. It gives me hope that more migrants can be aware of and advocate for workplace safety so they don't lose their independence in the long run like my father. Overall, I'm so grateful for the experiences I had. I'm proud to be the... I'll let you finish. So anyways, I just wanted you to get a bit of an overview of those two cases because I think they point us in two connected but different directions. I'm not going to get into discussing every part of my findings. If you want to read the summary of my findings, you can find it here. It's within the dissertation figures. But what I want to highlight, just to wrap up, is this idea of a multidimensional awareness of power that manifests both in how we interact and relate, and connecting and learning multidirectionally, right? So when we say, what's your name, right? What languages do you speak? It seems very simple, right? But we're welcoming people's knowledge, right? We're creating several opportunities for people to learn from each other. That's our multidirectional awareness of power happening in a micro level, right? We're thinking about our relationships. How can we be more horizontal and treat each other as like equals? And we're also using that awareness of power in the social critiques we build, right? So in Victoria's case, as you saw, her social critique was very powerful and also very personal, right? Which is a lot of the times the case with this cohort of immigrant students, brilliant immigrant students. So if you ask me, how do you do this sort of focus in power and in social interactions in your context, right, in your community engaged program, I would say the main thing is asking a lot of questions, right? I'm not getting into the specific questions, but it's just to illustrate that to do power-cognizant work, a big part of it is sitting collaboratively and thinking about how we're doing it and how we can do it better, right? How we can welcome other people's knowledges better, right? So my dissertation, in my discussion chapter, there's reflection questions. There's some of them that help us think about it. And just to summarize sort of how we did it in this context, I'm going to use the metaphor of gardening, even though I'm not a good gardener. But we are developing an awareness of social cultural contexts and power landscapes, right? Understanding where we are, what are the relationships, macro, micro, that we're embedded in, identifying and challenging power imbalances in our relationships, so trying to connect and be together in horizontal ways as opposed to hierarchical ways. We're building community, facilitating extended interaction. The conversation club that we tried today was just 3 minutes, but it's usually 1 hour and a half. We don't usually sit down for 1 hour and a half just to talk. I mean, I don't think I usually do that. And in that, we make connections, we facilitate dialogue, and we learn in community, right? We learn with and from everyone who's around us, the other students, the participants, the program coordinators, the instructors. And we develop, in doing that, and like also going to the literature and doing field notes, right? As I mentioned before, we're developing ongoing cycles of shared critical praxis. So like each of us is writing the final paper, and that's our personal reflection, but we're always exchanging ideas, and one reflection builds upon the other. And we are sharing strategies and conceptual lenses as we're doing that, and co-construction directions for inquiry, right? So, this is not linear, to be clear, right? This is more cyclical than anything. And yeah, that's where I'm gonna sort of leave us at. thank you so much. Reserve. I think it's just one side. Oh, nope, yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. This was incredible, touching, and really an expansive way of thinking about learning and community work and the very critical role of power. So I want to open it up to questions. We usually take questions both from the room and for Zoom. So to our people on Zoom, please post them in the chat or raise your hand. But we usually start with the room. Does anyone have questions?
Should I stop sharing this so we can just see people on Zoom?
Yeah, and I can also monitor them.
I guess we can see them. Never
There we
mind.
go. They're right.
Yeah. I just want to see who's there.
All right, go ahead.
So Marina, one of the things I love about your presentation is the emotionality and the fact that when we do research, we very much connect to our people and our data, even though many of us, when we are trained as researchers, are often taught about sometimes taking some distance, or at least using various procedures to validate and ensure our work is credible, which is still important, don't get me wrong. And so there's two questions I have, and I don't know if you can answer both. One is just, I'm just thinking about this for other doctoral students in the room. So I really liked your theoretical framework, but I know that the program that you were involved in has its own set of theoretical frames, right? And I'm wondering how you came to that theoretical frame as you were looking at your data, because I personally, as a qualitative researcher, like the connections between like the heart, the ground, and your cases. Like it's a way to sort of almost characterize your cases. So I like that.
Yeah.
So that's my first question, and that's probably
Okay. I was just going to put the slide with the framework so people can see
you
it.
didn't enter into this study with that framework, did you?
Can you repeat that part?
Did you enter into this study?
No.
With this framework? That's what I'm wondering. How did you get to this?
I never do. Which, well, yeah, I mean, I think it's been a very cyclical, iterative process. And it is something I believe works in qualitative research, but also it's how we do those programs, right? We are always coming back and seeing what's working and what's not, right? So same thing, I think, with the ideas guiding it here. I think, as I mentioned, critical praxis, for instance, is in the basis of the program, right? I didn't make that up. Also, we talk about asset-based approaches as opposed to deficit-based approaches to immigrant communities. That's a very big foundation of the Conversation Garden program. And this framework pretty much comes from this initial round of data analysis where I looked at what are the key themes that are repeatedly emerging on different interviews, focus groups, assignments, right? And when I came to, I think the initial motivation to create my own framework was that when I came to this, I was like, wait, community is kind of an afterthought here, right? We can think of community, but it's not in the center. And I was aware from our experience in the program, but especially from hearing from students that community connection, becoming friends with a participant, right? All of that was very, very important in their journey. So the main motivation was to introduce community into the conversation. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question in terms of like the process though.
And you're not, but that's okay. I just think the process, I just want people to realize the process is very important because as a professor, I often encourage my students to have a theoretical frame because I think it really helps you think about the questions you ask, the stance you take, and the analysis you do, right?
Right.
But I also am very interested, I also think that sometimes the frames we begin with don't work with the data we collect. And I think it's very important to think about how you can, I like this level of interpretation. So much of qualitative research I read is not where it needs to be because it's too descriptive. It's description without going to a higher level. And I like this, and I'm just trying to get
Right.
because your data is forcing you in a way.
Mm-hmm.
You know you can't quite articulate it yet
Right.
until you create a different theoretical frame. So I like that. That's all.
Just to comment on that, in a way, like for the doctoral students in the room too, like she's got critical praxis, reflexive ideology, power-cognizant, agency. Those are such loaded concepts, and it's hard to get your head around them. But what she did that I think was beautiful in the dissertation was, she's got heart, head, and hands. Like we all connect to that. We know what it means, and it actually you bring your whole body, literally and figuratively, to the work. And so you should read the dissertation because she writes about it, in depth in that way. So that's, I think, that was part of the journey too, right?
Maybe don't read the whole thing, but the last chapter. The last chapter is good.
Any questions online? I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to take questions, how. So I'm curious, and this is something we've sort of been thinking in our research team as well. In what ways in these courses did you help bring into the conversation the structural nature of these oppressions, the designed and intentional, right, white supremacy, and into that, either with history or without necessarily history, but understanding that this goes beyond discrimination of individual people being, discriminating against others, but that this is like baked in.
Right. I mean, that's such a great question, and I'm not fully sure of the answer. I think a part of it is a lot of the readings we draw from, or the sort of sociocultural approach to language learning that are doing this work of situating challenges that language learners face in the context of, like, do people have opportunities to practice language, right? So if you work as a domestic worker all day on your own, you only talk to your boss to get your payment, that's the only opportunity you get to practice your target language, right? So like the social-cultural dimension of opportunities to produce language is one aspect that we emphasize. And I think it's palpable because I think when I started teaching this course, I had all these ideas about power, and I tried to bring in this like very big ideas into the classroom. And oftentimes I noticed that students were not following, right? So versus when we talk about very concrete things, that stays with the students, right? This image of, that's actually an example used in one of the articles read of the domestic worker. That image always comes back for students, right? So it is systemic, but it is personal as well. I think another way that I personally did it, because I have this previous work that was about the school in New Brunswick that was displaced to give space to a university hospital. So we are very much implicated in this whole thing. So I always bring that case early on when I'm introducing New Brunswick. Because I think, again, it's about Rutgers, so it involves us a little more. Yeah, and I think it's just pointing out to this sort of specific experiences and the lines of difference that we're dealing with in them has been sort of, I don't know if that's not, again, I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm.
I think that part of the issue is that it's hard and it's not, right? So you can think about talking about, linguistic imperialism and the kinds of languages that we privilege,
Right.
and where did that come from, and why are those languages privileged? And that's has a personal dimension to it, but I think it's sort of, and so I'm wondering if the course is like, is there a balance? Is there? I'm almost hearing you say we sort of tried that, and it's kind of hard for students to grasp. So we're focusing more on the personal.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say like, again, I would say like the personal is what humanizes and bring concreteness. But for instance, when we talk, like in our first week of CLE, we do like, I do a land acknowledgement, but I don't read a land acknowledgement, but we watch a video about a specific group of indigenous people in New Jersey, right? And then we talk about how their language was erased, but they're working to preserve it. And right, and then from that, Victoria, who we talked about, brought up, well, in Peru, where my mom is from, that's a big issue, right? People are fighting for their linguistic rights. So I think also it's partially it's within the connections between different individual stories, like what Victoria was saying, right? I realized that what my parents are going through is not, yeah, it's like by design. So I think maybe that's how we go from the personal to the systemic, right? Just pointing out the ways in which things are that way. By design is a bit like conspiracy theory kind of thing, but by design in a certain level, right? Like, yeah, and how things are connected, right? We try to connect it and also like nuanced. I think a lot of our discussions, like, because we're talking about being an immigrant, but what is being an immigrant when you're a person of color? What is like being an immigrant when you were very new to the language versus you had the opportunity to study English in your country, right? So we talk about all these different nuances. And it was very easy to find those lines across because it was a group of immigrant students and students with immigrant parents, because they brought in so many different experiences with all those nuances, right? Yeah.
That was by chance, though, that they were.
By chance, yes. I think it's been happening in our program before this cohort that we are getting, as I said, a lot of honor students, and they're usually from immigrant backgrounds. Like usually second generation is the most common. I think that is a bit of the demographics of the honors program, honors college. I think it's also when they choose what program they're doing, they're like, oh, this is about immigration, like working with immigrants, language. I've been translating for my dad all my life, right? So I can do it. Right? So I think it's by chance, like it wasn't a sampling decision, but it's also, you know.
I love it. My question to you is, you did all this with students, college level, that they are immigrants, and I believe that is right. But do you think that you can repeat the same with a different kind of immigrants? Like people like me and most of the people that I know, that didn't come here with the language zero, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we run into all these that Victoria's parents run, you know, I look white, right? But I'm an immigrant, I'm Hispanic. So now the Hispanic believe that I'm not Hispanic because I look white. So it's a lot of studies. Can this experiment, let's call it, this research, be done at the level of people like me that came to school to study English, to learn the language? When I go to learn English, there are people from all over the country, not all Latinos. Can you repeat the same experience? So they talk about their experiences to know their parents, because it's a different, totally different. You are an immigrant that you came here to med school.
Yeah.
You are an immigrant you came here to clean for the parents.
Right.
So it's a different story, right? So can this be repeated to a level where, let's say, 75% of the immigrants come? It's not normal that you can be here as an immigrant to go to grad school. No, you can consider yourself lucky, but 75% of the immigrants here, we come from all over. Hispanic, from Africa, from everywhere, with different level.
Yeah.
That's the majority of the immigrants. Can you repeat the same experience? Can be translated?
Right. So I guess I will answer this in two parts. The first one is just a clarification. So the students I'm talking about, and I'm saying they're immigrant students, they are Rutgers students that were facilitating the conversation clubs. At the same time, they were working with this wide range of immigrant folks that were there as participants and who were from all this like very diverse backgrounds. One of the places where they were doing it was LECC, where it tends to be the case that most people are doing blue collar work, often without having to fight for labor rights and things like that, right? So just to clarify, like those I don't think those voices were present here as much. I also did not interview the participants. But if you go to the cases in the dissertation, you do get to learn a little more about specific participants who became friends with these students, for example, and what their so we learn about those experiences secondhand or third hand, if you count me in there. That said, I think it's interesting because we are working with folks from all different immigrant folks from all different walks of life that come to the Conversation Club because they want to practice English. We have all this orientation in our classrooms, but then we want to facilitate English conversation when we come to interact with the community members. So it is challenging for us to introduce those discussions, right, that are maybe getting into the systemic analysis, right? So what ends up happening on our like day-to-day program operation is that we'll introduce things like what you need to know about health insurance, right? Maybe we'll have a discussion question that gets into why health insurance is so expensive in the US, right? Or something like that. But it ends up being superficial because we are trying to facilitate opportunities for people to produce language and understand what we're saying. So if you get too wild with those ideas, it will be counterproductive. That said, I think when I was writing the dissertation, I was always thinking like, wow, it would be so interesting to hear what the participants that the students are talking about have to say about this more complex ideas that I'm like using to analyze their experience, right? So it was definitely a gap that I felt was in the study. The second case study, which I don't discuss here, ends up getting a little more into that because the student that I talk about, she interviewed this participant that she had a very deep connection with, and she interviewed her in her native language. Sorry, not in her native language. Her native language was Ukrainian, but she also spoke Russian. So she interviewed her in Russian. So yeah, I think it would be really interesting to think about those ideas along with the community members we're working with. But in this case, we just have, again, those voices kind of present sort of second and third hand in the study.
I just want to add that I don't feel that you answered this question the way he's asking it, because your study was mostly around college students and all of that. But like he's saying, and you also said the information you have is secondhand.
Right.
So how can you make it firsthand for people like us who did not come to go to the university, but we had to, babysit, clean floors,
right,
do all these things. And I have friends who came as medical doctors, but they had to work at McDonald's, they had to scrub toilets, and then their credentials were not even accepted. They had to go to school further, even though these are people who did research in their countries.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one of my medical doctor friends, when he was finally accepted into a program, not as a medical doctor, but either as a consultant or something, and there was delivery going on, and he was observing, and he saw the medical student, or whoever he was, deliver this woman, but he pushed her placenta back into her body. And so he had to run from the theater where he was observing to go and save the life of this woman, even though he had not yet been accepted as a medical doctor in the system. So for people like those, is there a way you can arrange, like this kind of research so that their stories will come out as well? And so in the final analysis, he did go in there, and whatever happened, well, he ended up in scrubs and had to go and save the life of this woman. And then later on, they had investigations, they had all kinds of things. But, what is the arrangement, higher education level that goes into these kind of research and not just secondhand?
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. I think I would say in terms of scope, this would just be a different study, right? Like I would have to go back and talk to participants, get their firsthand experience. But I think you touch upon the sort of politics of worthiness among immigrants, right? Like, or who gets rights to what, the different layers of privilege in being an immigrant. I think this is very much a topic of discussion among the students. And again, like, for instance, we talked about Victoria. Victoria didn't have the firsthand experience, but her father had it, her mother had it. So she was coming from a background that many other students who grew up in a middle-class suburb, even though they were immigrants, they didn't have. So they got exposed to those stories through, for instance, Victoria, and they also got exposed directly to some stories through participants. I think studying those experiences is a very important research agenda, right? Studying this firsthand, and I think it has those challenges, right? So we want to be able to talk to people maybe in their native language if that's what they're comfortable in, right? And so yeah, I mean, I think it is a whole different project from what I think this dissertation is. But I agree with you, and I felt that as I was writing. I'm like, I'm talking about this people secondhand, and this would be so much richer if I could talk to them as well. So yeah, it's, a work in progress.
Any last questions? We're almost at time. Anyone on Zoom? Last chance to forever hold your peace. Okay. Any questions in the room? No? Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.